Good evening, ladies, and welcome. Welcome to our February virtual national gathering. And for those of you who don't know my face, I'm new to the national side of things. My name is Katrina Faulkner, and I am from the Bonner County chapter here in Idaho. So again, welcome. And there we go. My script disappeared on me, went to sleep. Wanted to remind you all that the National Ladies Homestead Gathering is a nationwide nonprofit with chapters across the country. Our focus is to share knowledge, build community, grow in friendships. And one way we do this is by gathering monthly virtually to learn from each other and also to learn together. If you would like to learn more about nlhg.org, you can visit our YouTube channel or you connect on our online forum at community.nlhg.org. If you have questions for tonight for our speaker, please put them in the chat. And if they are for the speaker, then we will be saving those to the end. Once she's done with her presentation, then we'll go to our Q&A time frame that we have allotted for that. And if it's just a other question, please put in the chat and we will get to you as soon as we can. And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker this evening, which is Lorinda Barnes of Purebred Mini Jersey Society. Need my glasses. I'm excited to introduce Lorinda. She is a well-known homesteader from Priest River, Idaho. She and her husband Lance run Northwoods Homestead, where they've spent over a decade raising and breeding dairy cows. Their journey led them to specialize in purebred mini jerseys, efficient small-scale dairy cows, perfect for homesteaders. In 2019, Lorinda founded the Purebred Mini Jersey Society to help others preserve and breed pure Jersey genetics in miniature. So please give a welcome round to Lorinda. And Lorinda, I am going to turn it over to you. And right around 8:45, I will give you a little ding to let you know that you're almost out of time. And we'll go to Q&A.
Okay, that sounds good. Great, thank you.
All right.
I am going to pull up my picture. Okay, can I see the cover slide?
You're breaking up, Lorinda.
Oh, can you see the cover slide?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, I'm going to sit forward a little bit and speak really loud, so hopefully this goes well.
All right.
All right, so this is a very serious topic, and I'm going to try, my intention is to try to educate you so that it's not so intimidating. Buying a dairy cow is a huge investment, and a lot of times they do come with diseases. So you need to understand what to be checking for so that you can find out that it's not carrying something and protect your property and your family. As I was introduced, my name is Lorinda Barnes. On Facebook, you'll find me as Milkmaid Lorinda, and that was a moniker given to me by my husband's employer when he was active duty Army. It was very uncommon for people to have dairy animals or a homestead, so we kind of stuck out. And that name was given to me then, and it has just stuck with me, and it fits. So if you want to see my website and meet my herd, you can see them at a2a2minijerseys.com. I do want to make sure everyone understands that I am not a veterinarian nor a vet tech. I'm not a doctor, and this information is all things that I have learned through experience, and the links can be found for the slides. I will provide them to Miranda so they can be sent out to you. But this is all information that's available online if you want to take the probably 100 hours to do all the research. Okay, biosecurity, diseases, and testing. And we're going to cover the main 10 diseases that you're going to come across with both beef and dairy cattle. First section is biosecurity. Very important topic because it's going to protect your property and the cattle and animals that you have, the livestock on your homestead. The term biosecurity means protecting and keeping your property secure from biologicals that can come in, things like viruses, pests, bacteria, and viruses. So having dedicated farm shoes means that you've got shoes that you wear on your farm, you've got shoes you might visit another farm, And then you got your town shoes is what we like to call them. It's the shoes that we wear every day around. We try not to wear those to the barn to drop off feed, things like that. You don't want to carry in anything on your shoes on accident. That's not a very common way of spreading things, but pests specifically, things like ticks, lice, fleas can all come in on your clothing and your shoes. So if you're going to town or visiting someone else's farm, you don't want to come right back to your farm and run into the barn. Everything that you use, if you buy it secondhand, for example, you want to make sure it's sterilized. If you grab it at the local feed store co-op, you're going to want to make sure it gets sterilized then too, because you don't know if maybe it was picked up by someone, maybe even brought to their farm and then returned. So visitors and service providers want to wash their hands when they come to see your animals, your cattle. Anyone that is providing services should know better, but they can get a little lazy sometimes. Especially around beef cattle, they tend to be more lax about those biosecurity things. So we talked about wearing clean clothes, then stay on the path. So when they're visiting you, you want them to have clean clothes as well, and to stay on that path. And for us, that's the driveway. Specifically, we just say stay on the gravel unless they're invited somewhere else. And then we take those extra measures like washing their hands, bleaching their shoes, sterilizing their shoes. Your vet tech and your AI tech, your vets, all those services, hoof trimmers, they should be sterilizing the equipment between cattle. We're lucky sometimes if we can get them to hose off the hoof trimmers equipment before they'll start with our cows. So we are the ones that have to take that step to make sure that there's biosecurity happening. And you're the ones to protect your livestock. So that really is, it may feel a little uncomfortable, but it really is your responsibility. Testing. Once is never enough. Testing the animals before they come to your property doesn't mean that they weren't already infected and not showing symptoms yet, enough that would show up in a test, or possibly that they were infected after they arrived on your property. That's possible too. You may bring an animal in that you didn't realize, and then it starts shedding and then it infects other animals. So testing multiple times for several of these diseases, and we'll try to specifically say that, is going to be very important. Retest whenever you get a positive result. There is such a thing as a false positive and a false negative. So when you test and get a positive, you're going to wait about 3 months, about 90 days, and then you're going to retest and see if that was a legitimate. And we're going to also touch on what to do when you get that positive and you need to secure that animal away from your other stock. So we'll get into that. Ask for the test results when you're shopping for artificial insemination. I had assumed for a long time that because I was buying straws that were professionally produced, that there was testing in place by those facilities that were handling the bulls and their straws, but that is not the case. If they're being professionally collected in a stud barn, like say Jersey cattle, Angus cattle, those breeds that they're actually going through, like ABS, any of those professional facilities, they're being tested. But if you're buying from someone like me, who is producing on my farm, my livestock are tested because I test them, not because the collection facility tested them. I do have some straws produced on farm, and so that is absolutely 100% my responsibility. I also have some that are produced by a stud barn. They're done at a professional facility, and they require certain testing. And then I have additional testing that I do. So you need to ask your provider when you're purchasing straws to provide you with the proof of testing. The diseases that can pass being frozen and thawed and then inseminated into your cow is IBR, BVD, blue tongue, and trick. We are not going to be covering IBR, which I believe, if I remember correctly, is a type of cattle herpes. And blue tongue is not very common anymore, but it is possible to pass by a certain kind of a fly. And that, again, we're not going to cover that because those are less common. We're going to cover BVD and trick, though, later. But those are the diseases you need to touch on to make sure that your straws are safe. Quarantine, that is the process by which you protect your animals and your property by putting the animals coming in into a specific area of your property where they're not going to have any nose-to-nose contact with any of your other livestock. Since we're talking about cattle, specifically ruminants, that for us would also mean that the livestock guardian dogs are not going into that pasture and then leaving, and we don't want them ingesting any of the cattle manure, which they will, because that can also spread diseases that they get infected with and then spread your other cattle. Vaccines, I don't do a lot of vaccines, so I'm not going to speak on that very heavily, but it is part of the process of what you can be doing to protect your cattle. In certain parts of the country, it's very strongly recommended that you are doing vaccines, especially in those warmer, humid areas. So if you live somewhere like Florida, you're going to want to consider getting a hold of your vet, finding out what vaccines are recommended for your area. We don't have as much trouble really far north where I'm at because the cold kills a lot of things off. So they're not as common, but some things do hide in the soil. So well, we're going to get into all of that. But if you want to prepare a sample biosecurity plan, there's one there for you to look at. And these will be live in the PDF links that are going to be shared. Okay, you're going to hear a lot. Oh, I don't test because I have a closed herd. That's really scary because not everybody realizes what a closed herd actually means, and they get a little lax on it, or they just flat out don't understand what it is supposed to mean. So there are a lot of rules that involve a closed herd, and I have maintained a closed herd until last year, and then I intentionally broke that closed herd by bringing in animals, doing a calculated risk. So those are things, once you have the knowledge, that you can decide how you feel about that. Whether you want to keep a closed herd or not, it is very difficult. That means you're not bringing in any more outside cattle. All of your genetics are coming from AI, from tested straws. You're not bringing in any graft calves because maybe you lost a calf, or you want to grow your herd, so you just bring in an extra calf or two. You don't do any of that for 3 years or more. The current livestock that you have to have been tested clean prior to they got to your property, and then after they've actually been on the property, ideally about a year, you're going to test them again. You don't want your cattle reaching over fences or coming into contact with any other animals, and you don't want those animals jumping the fence or your animals jumping the fence and breeding across it that way. Nose-to-nose saliva, that's a big no-no when it comes to protecting your herd. And that also includes wildlife. So if you've got deer, elk, even things like coyotes coming onto your property could be a problem because they can spread neospora. You don't want to borrow colostrum from anyone because that could be infected. The colostrum in the milk can be infected. You don't want to take your cattle anywhere else to be grazing because if there were other cattle or previously, there could be diseases in the grass, in the soil. And then, of course, shared water sources. We've got a creek that goes through our property, and north of us on our creek are other livestock. So that's something you need to consider, that a shared water source, whether it be a creek or something like a feed trough that goes through the fence and both sides can access it. If you've got friends coming over to visit and they bring a dog, that dog could spread infection. If they're going to ride horses on your property, anything like that can be a big problem. You don't want to rent, borrow, or buy a new bull because, again, we don't bring any other livestock onto our property. We don't even take our animals off our property for vet treatment and then bring them back. So all the vet care is done on property as well. No going to the fair and bringing your animals to show and then bring them back. If you've got beef cattle, a lot of times those animals will go into auction and they don't come back. In that case, you are protecting your animals still. But if you're doing dairy, a lot of times they do come home after the fair. So that would break your closed herd. Borrowing trailers, that's one that we get a lot. People want to borrow a trailer because they need to move livestock, and trailers are a big investment. So be aware that if an animal is stressed, they will defecate everywhere. And your trailer will then be full of who knows what. And it's a big risk. So to lend your trailer, make sure it comes back completely sterile, which is almost impossible. Okay, we're getting into the diseases now. We've got 10 of them to cover. So why would anyone want to bother to test for disease? It's not free. There is an expense involved. The test can run anywhere from $7 to $200, depending on what kind of sample it is. But disease screening tests can be conducted even in the absence of symptoms. And the purpose of that is to identify those animals that are sick, that are spreading illness very early before everybody gets infected. They can get diseases that will shorten their lifespan. A lot of times you realize that because they aren't breeding back. So you do AI a couple of times, it doesn't work. You send them to a bull, it doesn't work. You bring a bull in, you buy a bull, and they still don't get pregnant. And that most likely means that they are infected. So if you're testing on a regular basis, you're not going to get that far into the process of infertility before you know already, because you've tested, and you won't waste the time or the money. Infected cattle have the potential to spread those diseases to other animals, typically other ruminants, but they can spread it to humans as well. If it's a zoonotic disease, that means that it will spread to any animal that is receptive, not just to other bovines. And often the diseases will infect the unborn calf. TB, I think that's the one that we all hear. It's the one that the government tells us is scary. You get tuberculosis, you end up in the TB ward and you die, right? It's not very common in cattle like it used to be. That is because the federal government has come in and they have eradicated it, essentially. Although we are having new cases of TB showing up because our borders of our country were unsecure and the disease has been brought in from other third world countries. So it is going around again, and it is something that you should be testing for, but you have to have your veterinarian help you with that. That's not a disease test that you can run on your own because of that federal regulation to eradicate it. So exposure, it can be spread at any time, at any age, they can pick it up. You can get it from inhaling those little bits of aerosol when an infected animal sneezes or coughs or is breathing. If they infect food, like an infected animal infects the food, the grain usually that you're feeding to your cattle, that's where they're going to pick it up. The symptoms are just some general weakness, appetite is going to be low, the milk production is going to be low, then they'll start developing a cough as they get later into the illness. The cattle can be tested. It's a very simple test. The vet's going to come and poke a little needle underneath the tail. It's called the caudal fold, a little piece of skin that's right underneath there. And then they'll come back 3 days later. So your vet's going to charge you for 2 visits and then the test as well. And they're going to just run their finger over that spot and see if there's any swelling. If there's swelling, the world stops. The vet is going to have to notify the state vet, the state veterinarian's office, and other people are going to get involved, and there'll be other kinds of testing that will have to be performed. I've been told, I found in the research that they can send those animals to slaughter with a permit, which means that they could potentially go into meat, is my understanding. But I don't know anyone that I was able to talk to that actually has had this experience beyond someone that did have a positive test. And then later with other testing, it was proven that it was antibodies and not an actual infection. So there are some differences there, but there's a source where I got the information. And we went on to bangs. Brucellosis, it's also commonly called bangs, and it is another one that's federally regulated, so we don't really see it very often, but it can spread to humans, so we want to be really careful about it. Brucellosis is part of that federal eradication program, and there are pockets of wildlife that are infected, typically around Yellowstone. We don't see it too much away from Yellowstone, but it can happen. There were some cases where the vaccine wasn't working properly and there were some infections from that. That's not the case anymore. You'll know that that's something that's going on. It'll be very obvious when they get brucellosis. The vaccine, very important that you understand the vaccine's not actually stopping the infection. The vaccine is stopping the abortion that the infection causes. But once they've had that vaccine, it will then test false positive more likely. So like, for example, an animal that has the bangs vaccine cannot be exported into Canada over the Canadian border because of those false positives. They'll get a tattoo in their ear, they'll get an ear tag in their ear, they'll get documentation. It's pretty obvious when an animal has been vaccinated. California, for example, though, will only take animals that have been vaccinated. And this is a vaccine that's given to heifers specifically because, again, it stops the abortions. And it's given before a year old. So about that 4 months to 12-month window span. When doing this one, I like to do it when the cattle are still, the calves, the heifers are still nursing, so that it's a little bit easier for them to be dealing with those things running around in their bodies. Okay, trick, they pop out the bowls. Cattle age goes to trick. Typically, they get there being bred by a bull that infected. So if you're animal, you want him to have not just breed soundness, but also trichiniasis. And we know he's got a higher back. We'll say he's tested because really as well. There's no appropriate trick, so it is infected or not infected, they are put down. Or it's zoonotic, not very easy for people to catch. Okay, we touched on this a little bit, that those infectious AI straws are really scary. Trick is something that can be transmitted by artificial insemination with infected semen. Request those trick results before doing an AI breeding. Freezing the specimen in nitrogen and thawing doesn't kill the protozoa, and many facilities do not test, nor are they required to. So that is on you as the consumer to make sure that the producer is testing. If you buy a straw and the bull had not been tested, but he's still living and he's tested now and he's clean, then you can assume any straws made before that point are still clean. Okay, BLV is bovine leukosis virus. It's a type of cancer that is infectious. I didn't know that there was such a thing until I started with my cows 15 years ago. It was the first time I'd ever heard of anything like this, that leukosis is something that can be spread. It's a virus related to cancers. So it can occur when uninfected animals of any age come into contact with blood, saliva, semen, milk, any of those fluids, birthing fluids, things like that. There is more study needed. They're not saying that BLV is linked to breast cancer, but there is some research that hinted that it is linked to breast cancer. They're finding parts of that BLV DNA in women's breasts, specifically when they have cancer. So you can make that leap of logic there. The lymph nodes are swollen. There'll be weight loss, fever. They are obviously not feeling well. They start having heart issues. Usually infertility is one of the early signs. There are a lot of cattle infected with BLV, and this is something that is also prevalent in dairy herds. So if you're at an auction and you see a cute little Jersey cow or a cute little Holstein calf, it's very possible that they are already infected. This is one of those things that is a sleeper, and it can be 3 to 4 years before it tests positive, although it has already been infected years before. So that's that. Once is never enough. You want to keep testing for this in case it does show up at a later date. It's not a hard test to do. This one is one that you can do blood or milk. You can send in a milk sample to a couple different labs. We're going to touch on that a little bit later, but it's very easy to do cow and milk. Now, if you're working with a heifer or a bull, then you're going to have to send in a blood sample, of course. The dairy cow. Okay, BVD, bovine viral diarrhea virus. Who would have thought that diarrhea could kill you, right? This one is, it's not zoonotic, but it is one that's a lot more dangerous for our cows than you would expect. This is one, though, that if you test for the persistent variety, you do not need to retest for it. So you want to find out from your lab if they're doing the kind of test that doesn't need to be repeated. If you're testing through your breed, through their registration organization, then you probably don't need to repeat this test. You can do it with milk, very easy again. Cattle at any age can be infected with this through any of those bodily fluids that we've been talking about. It can also be transmitted from the dam to her fetus across the placenta. In that case, those animals are the persistently infected, and the dam will have been exposed while she was pregnant. And then if that fetus is able to make it through the whole of the pregnancy and be delivered, it will be a virus factory infecting every calf around, every cow in the field that it's with. It's one of those ones that spreads because it's diarrhea. It's coming out everywhere all the time. And I have heard of this going around the United States very much so in the dairy herds. I don't think it's as common in the beef herds, again, but definitely in the dairy herds. And they can pick it up somewhere like at the auction. And the auctions are always scary because you just never know what you're getting. Looks like the internet's being a little slow, not loading up very fast. Oh. Hang on, guys. Like it jumped forward on. I'm so sorry. We were nope. Technology. Okay. Now this one always gets everyone because they don't know how to pronounce it, and I have mispronounced it myself. So it is Yonis, is how it's said. Yonis. And you can go to yonis.org for loads and loads of information. This one is very scary because it's one of those sleepers, and it doesn't pop up usually until 3 to 6 years old. Uncommonly, it could be as late as 7 years, but that's typically it's the 3 to 6. But what happens is those calves are infected early in their life when they don't have the defenses against it. Their immune system is still immature, and they get it from typically feces. So if there's anything on their dam's udder and they nurse it, they're infected, and it will burrow into their intestine and then just wait for a time when they are stressed, whether it's heat stress, cold stress, moving stress, dietary stress during a drought, something like that, is what will cause those bacteria to start to multiply to where they are actually shedding and infecting other animals. And it's because it's a sleeper one, it's really scary. You never really know for a long time if your animal is clean. So test and retest. If there's nothing else you take away from this, test and retest. Yonis is chronic. It's not something that you can get rid of. Once they have it, there is no cure, and you do need to get rid of them. Take that time to do the extra testing. So if you get a positive with a PCR or an ELISA test, you're going to want to spend the money and do a fecal culture. That will be the definitive answer if they're actually infected, so that you don't accidentally put down a false positive and find out that the animal is actually infected. So I don't know in this situation that I would wait that 90 days. I would probably freak out and go ahead and send in the fecal right away, but you're going to be moving that animal out of your herd anyways. See if it coordinates. Okay, so another name for Yonis is Mycobacterium avium subspecies paratuberculosis, and it's commonly referred to as MAP, but usually you're going to hear people just talking about it as Yonis. Your vet will probably call it MAP. In '96, they did some testing. They pulled, I believe this was done specifically in Europe, but they pulled milk off of the shelf that was being sold, and they did find that Yonis was present in it, that what we consider safe still had a Yonis infection in the milk that can, again, be passed to people. In people, it's called Crohn's. So it's the same kind of infection, but it's a little bit different in people. And there's a lot of testing being done on this, so they are connecting it to Crohn's much stronger than they used to. All right, Neospora. This is a protozoan parasite. It can infect animals of any age. If they're infected while they're pregnant, it can transmit to their offspring if the baby can even survive the pregnancy. It's dogs, anything canine can spread this infection. They spread it through their feces, and then it gets somehow into the food chain, whether it's the cattle grazing or it ends up somehow along with the grain or things that the hay that the cows are eating. And once it's in the cow, their feces doesn't actually spread the oocytes like the dogs can. So one cow can't infect another cow unless a dog comes along and eats that and then can finish that process again for creating oocytes that are infectious. In warm climates, it's really impossible to get rid of. They found that even when the feces of a dog had decomposed, that there was still the possibility of infection present. In cold climates, it takes about 3 days of freezing, below freezing temperatures to kill those oocytes and make it so that they infect us. So if you have an animal that's infected, you have to let your property sit through a winter basically to make sure that there is no chance. Breaking up any cow pies, letting things decompose, and wait for your soil to be safe again. And then hopefully you're good. Don't let the dogs anywhere near any of the feces. Usually though, you're going to be seeing the symptoms there. There's going to be abortions. You're going to lose those calves. They rarely will make it all the way through. And a lot of times they do have things wrong with them because of all of the attacks they were going through from the protozoa parasite. Easy to test for. Test for is it's at a late age with those with fluids again can also be started on is able so it's a little bit air water first. Some testing can be done through culture, things like urine fluid. They can do after that lose animal and you're just not sure. This is one of those tests that they can run for you. If an animal has had pneumonia, it may be something that you want to test for because that can be something that is persistent, pneumonia being persistent. The antibiotics can be used for people, but they don't typically use them in animals. And this one is really weird because the animals that are vaccinated, the vaccine doesn't always work. And sometimes they actually get the illness, get it even worse than they would have otherwise. So that's where you want to talk to your vet and see if you're in an area that's at risk for this. And Q fever, query fever. This bacteria is found from the birth products. So if you think an animal might be infected, there's a lot you have to go through to protect yourself because it is something that you can catch from your cow. Just your feces, you're going to want to wear gloves when you're milking, anything like that, until you get that second test and find out whether she's actually infected or not. Goats and sheep are usually the carriers, and cattle can become infected at any age. The symptoms are not limited to, but usually include fever, fatigue. You'll see that they're in some pain when they're moving around. People will get the same kinds of things, and it can be chronic, very long term, and they have to be on antibiotics for a year, sometimes longer, sometimes years. And I don't think they even treat the cattle. My understanding is and put them down. Staph A. This is one that is pretty common through dairies because Staph aureus lives on the surface of all kinds of things. It's on our skin, it's around. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people will dip after they do the milking. They'll dip the teat ends to seal them because staph can spread just from the soil if it's dusty and it gets picked up. It can spread on your hands. A lot of times in dairies, it's spread in the cleaning equipment. The towels that you use, you want to make sure you're washing things in hot water. It is very if the 1 quarter, it's very likely she's getting other quarters, and you can spread through your milk machine to all the other cows you have in milk at the time. You may want to have 2 separate machines if you're going to be dealing with a Staph A cow. A lot of times people, especially homesteads, don't even want to deal with it because once it's in, it's almost, I'm not even close. It's impossible to get rid of it. It will keep coming back. You'll think you won the battle, and 6 months down, and she'll have it again. Those little pustules you see on there, those are a very, very common sign of staph in the skin. It can get really bad. You can get gangrenous infections in the teats, lose whole quarters of the udder. It's obviously very painful. Those boils, I'm sure, don't feel good. Yeah, cleaning your milking equipment, keeping your cows clean. If she's in milk, when you buy her, ask to test for staph A. You can know ahead of time if she's got the staph infection in any of her quarters. Sometimes you won't even realize it. Maybe she's just not getting as much milk in that quarter as you think that she should compared to the other quarters, and it'll turn out she's got a very low grade staph A infection. So testing the cow before she comes onto your property is a good way to protect your other cattle and to protect yourself. Okay, I've been saying testing, 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 and now we're going to get into what that actually looks like. There's a few things to know, some common terminology: ELISA versus PCR testing, the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay test, which is why we all call it ELISA, or ELISA, I've heard it either way, is a popular test. It's very common. It's not very expensive. This is usually the one that we're going to do when we send our samples in to be tested. There is the PCR test, which is a little more sensitive. It usually is very inexpensive as well. And I believe with this one, they're actually looking for pieces of the DNA chain of certain infections. And when you test, you're going to tell them which infections and which things you're looking for. So that's what they'll be doing with that test. Either one is good. They're a good basic test for just about everything that we're going to need. Sometimes you're going to do blood, and sometimes you're going to do milk samples. Personally, I don't like pulling blood. I have my husband do it. And when we can, we have our AI tech or our vet do it. If they're here for other things, we'll be like, by the way, can you, after you breed that cow, go grab some blood off of this one, go grab some blood off of that one. Milk sampling is the easiest. Sometimes it may mean that you need to keep your cow in milk a little bit longer so you can test in the time frame that you're after. The milk sampling, there are little vials you can purchase through most of the different labs. They'll give you a link to where they want you to purchase supplies. I use Armor Animal Health Testing Lab out of Portland because it's so close to me. Central Star is another one, but they have links to where they want you to purchase the supplies from. Sometimes those milk vials will have a little tablet in there that helps with the preservation. The directions from the lab will tell you if they want you to freeze that sample, if it's necessary or not. Certain times of year, when it's really hot, they may ask that you freeze it and then put it on ice before you send it. Blood samples almost always need to be on ice before sent. Typically, you're going to do the blood for something that's a systemic infection. We're not going to be anything that's going to be more milk and udder related. So if you're testing for mycoplasma in the udder, in the milk, staph A, you would do a milk sample. And then the red top versus the purple top. Typically, the red top vials are the ones used for blood serum, and the purple top vials have an anticoagulant for plasma. But when stuff comes from China, it's not always what it's supposed to be on Amazon. So make sure that you're getting what the lab says, if it wants it to have an anticoagulant or not. Okay, this is just a quick little slide to kind of give you an idea of what you can use for samples. For BLV, for example, you can use milk or blood, and they're going to run that ELISA test. Let's see, Neospora, you can test that one with milk or blood, but also you can do a tissue sample or a fetal tissue sample. And you are trying to figure out why the calf died, why it was stillborn. PCR or ELISA would be the common test done for that one. Staph A, again, you're going to want to do milk if you believe it's an infection in the udder. If you think it's something systemic, then you're going to want to test blood. And there's a specific test that they use for that one. How to collect those samples. It's really important that you get a clean sample. I've included some video examples here that are done by vets, that are done by professionals who have shown how to be able to collect that clean sample. It's pretty easy for blood because you're getting it directly out of the vein, whether it's in the neck, the tail, or the milk vein underneath the cow's belly. But milk samples can be contaminated by the area around. I had a sample come back one time that said that there was, oh gosh, I can't remember. It was something innocuous. And I called the lab and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Is my cow sick? And they asked flat out, do you have a dirt floor in your barn? Yeah, I do have a dirt floor. And they said, just retest. It's just contaminated. If she shifted her feet, she could have stirred up some dust and it got into the vial and contaminated the milk. So that's what we did. And the next one was clean. So I learned that I needed to be more clean about the area around my cow, because not only do I need clean milk samples when I'm catching the milk for that purpose, but I need clean milk. So I don't want that dust to be stirred up. So we keep a lot more straw down on a cow than we do because of that reason. So testing is important. If you're doing tissue samples, then you're going to want to sterilize the equipment that you're using to cut the tissue and the container that goes into, so you don't have any accidental cross-contamination. Fecal samples are pretty easy. You again want to make sure that your container is clean, that it's sterile, so there's no cross-contamination, that you want it to seal really well, and they like you to put that one into a leak-proof plastic bag. And I do that with my milk and my blood samples as well, just to make sure when it goes through the mail, if there's any problems, it doesn't contaminate the rest of the package or anyone else's packages. Okay, there are lots of different places you can do depending on what your needs are. Usually the universities are going to be expensive. If you're in a state, they're going to be even more expensive. They're going to do things that maybe your smaller labs aren't going to do. With Armor, I can test for BLV, DVD, Yonis, Neospora, and pregnancy, but I can't test for Q fever, for example. There are certain tests that you may need to try down at universities. In Idaho, we actually use Buttle. In Washington State is a really excellent lab. They're very helpful when I've had to call for things. I've also gone to Georgia, and I've also called University of Kansas for different things. Minnesota and Wisconsin, they've got big dairy ag programs. So if you're looking for milk-related things, those are great places to go. Beef, you can go anywhere. There's a lot more beef testing than dairy testing. So those private labs down at the bottom, again, they usually specialize in what it is that they test for, but they're going to be less expensive. So I can run most of those tests for $7 or $8 compared to if I run it through Waddle, it's going to cost me $50 for the same test that was $7 somewhere else. All right, when you get that positive test, I get a lot of phone calls and text messages from people, emails. They got a positive, they don't know what to do next. It is really scary because it means literal life and death. So the first thing you need to do is protect the rest of your herd. You want to remove those clean animals out of the pasture and put them into another area where the infected animal, the positive animal, was not at any time in the at least previous 90 days. And then you're going to retest that positive in 90 days and see if it's still positive. You might want to go through a different lab. You might want to try, if you did ELISA, you might want to do a PCR this time. And then any of those things, make sure that they're calving on clean ground, because if you have infection on your property, you don't want them picking that up. To mitigate the risks on the rest of your property, the infected feces and the fluids in the ground need time for the things like the bacteria and viruses to die out. Usually, like we said, in a cold climate, it's not going to take quite as long. In a warmer, moist climate, somewhere like Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Alabama, and any of those areas, you guys are going to have to wait a lot longer for your infected ground for those things to not have their host and to die out. Some things can live about a year, sometimes longer, if they have the right situations. Animals that are thought to be infected need to be calving on the ground that you've already exposed them to, so that you can call that infected ground, so that they're not spreading it any further around your property. Any of the tissue, the birthing fluids, amniotic sac, any of those things, blood, if you're putting an animal down, all those things you're going to want to burn, you're going to want to destroy, you're going to want to bury it really, really deep so that no other animals can dig it up and eat it and spread that around on your property. You want to remove the bottle-fed calves and make sure the colostrum they're getting is clean. Purchased colostrum is usually pasteurized and homogenized, but that pasteurization kills most things except for yonis. So you want to try to make sure that that colostrum is as clean as possible. Treat that calf's manure and all of the birthing matter from them being born as biohazard until you're able to test that calf, but you can't test the calf until the antibodies from the colostrum and milk are worn off, which is anywhere from 6 to 12 months. So if you do test at 6 months, you're going to need to test again at 12 months, at least again at 12 months, and then probably again 12 months later before you breed that heifer, for example. A hard call is when you actually put your animal down, when you've decided that there's no other choice but to put the animal down to protect everyone else and for their own comfort, because they're probably going to start getting really, really sick. This is probably one of the hardest things that you're going to ever have to face in your whole life. Decide to have to put an animal down that you love, that you possibly even raised to be your dairy cow or to be your beef cow, and she's been in your herd for a long time. Make sure that you've done that retest and that you've had multiple positives so that you know that there is no other option. It'll make it easier for you to live with it. When it's possible, if it's a positive for yonis, you're going to run that fecal test. You want to limit the spread to protect your herd, and that's why the decision is being made. It's for the best for everybody else and for the potential future of your herd. If you're going to ever bring in other beef animals, or you just want to grow your herd and have more cattle and you don't. I mean, a lot of people, they'll retire from the cattle industry, suddenly sell off all their animals, and it's because they got a positive. And they may have put the worst one down, but they don't know if the other ones are. They don't even have the heart to test because all those positives are just going to be too hard. So they just liquidate. And people bring these animals in not realizing that that retirement is actually a liquidation sale to protect themselves from this illness in their herd. So try to limit that spread, protect your herd, put the animal down that is definitely positive, destroy, burn, bury infectious tissues and fluids. That's manure, any water that troughs they were drinking out of. If the animal has a disease that you can process the meat, make sure that that meat is cooked well. You're not going to be having any lean steaks. You're not going to be feeding raw to your dogs, for example. This is meat that would have to be cooked. There are some plans here to do a risk assessment and to help you figure out how to deal with yonis. It's one of the scarier ones to me personally. So if you can deal with yonis, then that will kind of go across the board and help you protect your herd from all of the illnesses. Those long-term effects. So I've been harping on that you got to burn, bury, destroy all of those infectious things. That's because TB, for example, will survive in your soil. It can survive in water and manure, and even on surfaces in the summer. It likes that warmth. It'll last for as long as 14 days. But in the winter, it really likes it, and it will last as long as 3 months. If it has the right conditions, it can even go longer. Ultraviolet rays will inactivate it, though, within hours. Sun will help to kill the TB. Pasteurization is required, and that's why it's so common. All of our milk now is pasteurized because of the TB that was so prevalent, 100 years ago at the turn of the previous century. Bangs lives in the soil for up to 125 days. It can be longer in the colder temperatures or in humidity. The Brucella abortus is destroyed when infected milk is heated to 161 degrees for 15 seconds. Trichinosis cannot survive outside of the host, but it can survive being frozen in nitrogen, thawed, and then used in AI for your cow. BLV meat should not be consumed. The milk products should not be fed to calves. BVD is very stable under moist, cold conditions. It's not affected by freezing and can easily survive at least a week in the right environment, meaning it is still infectious. You can survive over a year, especially if the soil is acidic. It can survive heat, cold, and even in a dry environment. Neospora, it's thought dogs will only shed the oocytes from 2 to 3 weeks for 3 to 9 days after their infection. I wouldn't put my life on that, but that is what the research is showing. A hard 3-day freeze or cooking it will kill it, but it can survive in the right environment. When the feces has decomposed, it could still be there present. Mycoplasma can live for weeks. longer if it's in manure, shorter if it's on a clean, dry surface. Q fever can survive in the soil for months, possibly even years. Staph A is less likely to survive without the ideal conditions, and it can survive freezing, but it does not do well in the soil. It doesn't remain infectious in the soil very long. Okay, that's a lot of information, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me while I tried to figure out what happened with my slides in the middle there. If you want to learn more about what I'm doing with the purebred mini jerseys that are DNA pure jersey but small stature, you can find my cattle again at a2a2minijerseys.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and then Purebred Mini Jersey Society is the registry that I started to be a community for people heavily involved in education about sharing how to get that DNA testing to test your mini jersey, find out if she's actually carrying pure jersey genetics. And we are all over the internet. Also, I've got an email in there. You can email at admin@purebredminijerseys.com, and that goes directly to me. So if you want to reach me, that's a good way to do so. Do we have questions?
We do. We have a question. Can you test dogs for Neospora?
Yes, you can. Your vet can test your dog for Neospora. Like livestock guardian dogs, when you buy them, that's a great test to get for them.
All right, and we also had a comment earlier from Shannon Barnes. She says that she has dealt, she had 2 cows with Johnny's, and it was a horrible disease to deal with. Just wanted to share that comment.
Hi, Shannon. Yeah, that one's really nasty. It is miserable to see them go through that when they won't keep weight on and they just keep getting worse and worse and worse. That's the first thing to test for. And it's a really sad one to see happening to your cow. I'm sorry that that happened to you.
All right, ladies, any other questions out there? That was a lot of information.
It is a lot, and I'll make sure you get those slides.
All right, drop them in chat. This is your one chance. Well, I shouldn't say one chance, but this is it. Let us know. You have Lorinda all to yourself for every question you ever wanted to know.
I do see some familiar names here. Did you enjoy it? Did you get the answers that you need?
Well, that's a big yes from Shannon.
Good. Good. And if something comes to you later, you're welcome to email that admin@purebredminijerseys.com, or even go to the national page and just put the question out there, tag me in it, and I'll make sure you get an answer.
We do have another question.
Okay.
Deer like to hang out with her cows. How concerned should she be about that?
If the deer look healthy, then probably the biggest concern is going to be something like lice. They are species specific, but they love to jump ship and they'll cause a little bit of havoc before they die off. If you live in an area where the deer are having trouble with chronic wasting disease, I would be very concerned about those deer mingling with your cattle, because that is zoonotic and will spread to your cows.
Did that answer your question, Sheila? Well, I'm going to take that as a yes. Oh, it sure did.
Okay. Yeah, chronic wasting would be the biggest concern there. And it's only in pockets. It's spreading. We have it in Idaho now. We didn't used to, but mostly it's in pockets. Maybe at some point we'll do a slideshow on those extra diseases that weren't in the top 10 when I was trying to decide how to narrow it down.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you very much for spending your time with us tonight.
My
Lorinda,
pleasure.
that was, didn't know anything about cows, so I feel so much more informed, which is the whole point, and also why we gather as ladies. So I want to say thank you very much for your time tonight. And for everyone here on the call, you can also replay this in the VIP vault this Friday. Turn my camera back on. Here we go. So this Friday, you can replay it in the VIP vault. And you can also do the YouTube channel in 2 weeks. Next month, join us to hear how to use social media to further your homestead's reach. And with that, I will wish you all a good evening. Good evening. Have a great month, and we'll see you in March.